Cool. Yeah, I can see your screen and everything is good. I think we should start, Glenn. I hand it over to you. And before I do, just I'll paste the information about the group and stuff on the chat bot. And in case anybody has any questions, just shoot. Glenn, over to you.
Yeah. Just find my slides here. Yes, thank you for joining. This is our meetup number 8, Moed, isn't it? I think so, yeah. And
Yes,
it
it
will
is.
be our last meetup before this summer, this year. And that's why we want to create it a little short and quick one about classification, label, taxonomy. We're going to focus on this around Purview labeling and those things. And I will start with talking about the requirements and before you even start with the labeling, it's important to get a handle
Glenn,
of. Yeah, sorry.
can I, maybe if you could give a little bit of why we're talking about this, and that would help.
Yeah, you think about in this series of different.
Yeah, just why are we talking about the taxonomy? Just so in case somebody looks at this recording in isolation, they know the
Yeah,
context, right?
of course, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah, we're going to talk about classification of data. And the classification of data is like when it comes to Purview, there is different types of classification. But if you want to do it in 365 in general, there is labeling that is most important for the users to decide what type of information and how do you want to classify it. So that's why we're going to talk about how do you arrange these labels and how do you use it more user friendly and so on. Yes, let me start here. So before we start, we need the label and the technical stuff. I want to talk a little bit about it's dependent on doing starting with and having actually a strategy about data governance. I recommend that you start by getting a grasp of the condition of your data estate and see where it resides and where it is. Is it protected or is it unprotected, and where it is. And after a solid overview of your data estate, where you have more or less know where your data is and what type of data is, what you need to what's your compliance, what's your risk and level of governance. Then first, in that case, you can start to apply a concern strategy to labeling and governance. There is some steps for getting this right. One of the steps is to facilitate workspaces across your Microsoft 365 application, where you can maintain all data and you can ensure that you have the governance strategy in place. One of the when it comes to labels, it's and the naming strategy, it's important to make it simple and legible. For example, business critical label might imply confidentiality, and then a lot of employees will probably choose that one. But if you make it more legible, that if, for example, have a highly confidential, it's or public, that's have a simple meanings. Yes. You derive labels from their parent container labels. that consistent boosts security at multiple levels, ensure that deviation from the default are exception and not the norm. You can of course trust your employees to apply sensitive labels, but you also need to verify that they choose the right labels. Um, you use that by utilization. Utilize, for example, data loss prevention, which hopefully know about. Um, you can use sets of auto labeling services, both client side and service side. That's with Purview in general. And then you configure to try to limit oversharing and to limit the different type of sharing levels. There is some steps when it comes to how many type of labels you choose. Try to maximize on 5 parent labels. I will show what parent labels is, and only 5 sub labels. That's the way the employee can they are not getting overwhelmed, because it takes time to adapt to the process internally to have this label. Label your data container for segmentation to ensure that your data isn't overexposed by default. Consider setting your container label defaults to private, no guest settings, for example. Train your employees to handle and label sensitive data, increase accuracy, and ensure they recognize label cues across your productivity suite. And it's also recommended to adopt with strong lifecycle management policies around these labels.
Glenn, I have a question at this point.
Yeah.
Are some of these default? I mean, do we have like some of these as default? Like you said, privacy, no guest. Is that default, or is that something that you have to set? And by default, it's something less.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Okay, so if you are a new user of Microsoft 365 as a collaboration platform, there is no, at the moment, there's no labels at the moment. You can, of course, use Microsoft's default labels. Yeah. And when it comes to privacy settings, things are more or less open. Yeah.
What do you do for that? What
Then
should anybody
you
do for
need
that?
to that's what I'm going to recommend later. Microsoft has a couple blueprints, security blueprints that is recommended to implement, which secure privacy and limit oversharing, especially when it comes to AI services that you are utilizing and your data.
Okay, so there are guidelines for this.
Yes, it's
There's
quite
still
heavy
progress with
guideline.
the
Yeah,
technical
yeah.
implementation.
I will
Okay,
refer to some guidelines later.
okay, cool. Thanks.
Well, the process implementing labels. There is some steps you need to take. First of all, you need to have a committee bringing in professional, bring from all relevant disciplines around the organization, HR, legal, security, IT, or anyone else that has relevant expertise on the different type of the organization, because they wanted to know about this labeling, and then they wanted to see how this labeling is adaptable to the organization. So that pipes over to the second point there, be intentional about addressing unique needs around control and governance. So the labeling taxonomy meets that. Implement this with self-service accountability, set up systems like attestation, You have SharePoint Advanced Management to do site permission reports and so on, and guest access reviews. Yes, so I saw there was someone on their way in here, but yeah. People tend to take easiest path, make the IT preferred path, and the best and easiest. So that is direct roadblocks. That's you need to involve all the professionals around the organization. User adoption is very important. Have a good process, ambassadors for these labels and governance. And also inform site owners and inform them on how they do a survey and make them, for example, sending out forms where they can do some input on what type of information they have around in their sites. Keep it simple. That's the most important thing. Yes. Now it comes to this blueprint I'm talking about from Microsoft and Moit. Microsoft released last year kind of a framework or blueprint, whatever you call it, with the label Taxonomy, called Secure by Default Foundation. These are labels that are based on trying to limit oversharing and sharing of information outside the organization. These classification labels is, you see, there are 4 parent labels, or kind of top labels, and there is 3 sub labels under this confidential and highly confidential. This description is just an example. You can decide whatever kind of user description you want. This Microsoft has changed because they started with general, and that was named the internal before. But then they changed it to general to have it more adaptable. Confidential and highly confidential has been there for many years, and also public also. Yeah. This sublabels is actually has the same classification value as the parent one, but they are more or less for compatibility. All employees is for sharing information internally with everyone, with no specification on or no restrictions internally. The specific people label is for, as you say, specific people, both internal and external, where you can limit on the restrictions of who can view, who can edit, who can share, and who can print and so on that label. That utilizing something called Microsoft Service Encryption, Microsoft Service Encryption, which I'm going to talk about in the next session. Microsoft introduced in this template a label called internal exception, and that is for internal systems that has information that are not compatible with Microsoft Service Encryption. Yeah.
Glenn, how do you propose we control these services that might fall under internal exceptions, because they're kind of growing every day?
Yeah, that's an important thing. When it comes to 365 and information, kind of unstructured information is what we call this one, unstructured data. Yeah. I recommend to when there is internal expectation, you must like support that one with data loss prevention, which do the governance around this type of data. So, for example, this information are not encrypted. Then you try to limit it with the data loss prevention, possibilities to send it through email outside the organization. Try to limit the sharing levels.
Mhm.
And you also have possibility to use something called endpoint data loss prevention, where you can also
Oh yeah.
limit copying it or uploading it to different kind of storage, cloud storage solutions. Yeah. So you need to support it and follow up with data loss prevention now, because they
Exactly.
are vulnerable since they are not encrypted.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yes. I will go through more of what we can do around these labels a little bit here further. This is kind of a suggestion from Microsoft, which is they are using internally. When it comes to taxonomy, there is a lot of different types of implementation. This needs to be adapted to your organization. There is when you are using these labels, you have a solution where you can recommend labels. You can like have a default label. So in this solution here, which let's see, on files and the documents, what it is, they are recommending all confidential all employee as the default label, and they recommend general as the email label for if you want to send data. Um, in my example, I see a lot here in Norway. They wanted to introduce a second label called personal. Someone call it private, but and that one is it more or less for label information that is not. It's actually non-business though. Someone using non-business. Um, there are a lot of organizations using personal or private as a non-business data. Typically, is this information data is residing on especially OneDrive, for example. So this is different example of label taxonomy. Um, what I recommend is like to try to limit to only 5 parent labels and probably maximum to 3 sub-labels on each. Just zoom in here, a little bit small. So this is actually different type of examples we see implemented around in organizations. When it comes to personal, or if you're using the name personal or private, I really recommend using private because there can be some misunderstanding of that personal interpretation. So but let's talk about a little bit around configuration of these labels. Public, that one is scoped for mainly files and emails. General is the scoping, because it depends on where you can use it. Can you use it in files, in documents, or can you use it in emails? Is also the scope is also file emails, but there is also site labels as well, and also meeting labels, because you can do some basic configuration and restriction of site settings like sharing, and you can with these labels you can also configure a level of guest access as well on sites that has that function. When it comes to confidential, the best practice is also use file and email scope in meetings as sites as well. And the confidential, we are introducing encryption, and Microsoft's baseline is based on co-author access. That means that you have almost full editable access to the documents, but you're not full control. So it means that you cannot change the label if you are not the owner of the documents. When it comes to site setting on the confidential labels, all employees and specific people, they are set to default at privacy level, private. Confidential all employees, also here is the level where you can introduce data loss prevention rules that are triggering as a condition that the document is labeled confidential, where you can block anyone with link. That's a function in action function in data loss prevention, and block external. That means sharing externally. That one is on all employees. But when it comes to specific people, the only action limitation there is that is recommended is to use block anyone with link, because specific people should be possible to share outside. But since there is a specific people label with the encryption, the user has to decide what type of restriction there is following up on the label. The thing with the internal exception is like, since you don't have any encryption configuration on this one, this will decrypt documents that has this possible, but you need to be the owner to decrypt it. If you move down to highly confidential, it's almost the same as confidential. You have the scope for these labels is sites, email and documents, and meetings. The encryption level for all employees is all user in their organization, and there is co-author as well. Same with specific label. There is there is a slight change on the encryption settings for specific people, highly confidential, specific people confidential. It's a little bit more strict. It's added a function called do not forward on that specific people label. Means that when you send an email with highly confidential specific people, the recipient is not allowed to forward it to other recipients. On the confidential specific people, there is encryption as well, and user hack can decide the encryption and the restriction, but there is not allowed. You're allowed to forward it. That's the difference with with confidential specific people and highly confidential specific people.
Glenn, in any case, can you do both, encrypt and not forward?
Yeah.
Okay,
It
which one?
actually, if you do, that's a very good question. If you add do not forward, it's still encrypted, but you add the do not forward option.
Okay.
You
Because
understand?
usually when I do email forward, it usually just gives me encrypt and or do not forward. So I can only select one. So that's
No,
kind
but
of
this is like if you it's only you will have a base configuration that is encrypted, but you can add the do
Mhm.
not forward option as well onto it. Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Internal exception is has the same configuration as the internal exception, where you remove the encryption. Yeah, Andreas has a yeah, it's right. Do not forward includes encryption unless memory betrays. Yeah, correct. But at this level, especially this highly confidential Olympus, you are introducing something called auto labeling. You can introduce that label for auto. That's actually recommended. If you want to start with auto labeling, you introduce highly confidential employees. You introduce it on because you introduce, if you want to start with auto labeling, you start with small set of data, and probably highly confidential is the only like 2 or 3% of your data in your organization. So you can introduce, there's two sets of auto labeling in Purview. You have client side auto labeling and you have service side auto labeling. Client side auto labeling is bound to the label itself, where you add something called sensitivity info types, which are artifacts that triggering this use of these labels, where you can either get a recommended warning, that tooltip, what do you call it, that now you are uh, writing or did information into the document, and they recommend that you are choosing highly confidential all employees. Or you can configure to just auto label it. That's for data that is client side. You can also use something called server side auto labeling, which are useful for data at rest, where there is something called auto labeling policies, which use, as I said earlier, sensitive info types, artifacts that run in the background and labeling documents. So that's a little bit overview of configurations around this my recommended and Microsoft the label taxonomy. Uh, I got this question about different type of languages. I just put in some example codes because you have possible to adapt to different operating system settings for languages, but you need to do that with the compliance PowerShell, where you fill in different type of where you, for example, in this case, you are configuring the label public, and it has a couple of this. You have two type of display names. Public in Norway is called open, and in German called offentlich. So you can have different type of naming and also tool tips as well in the same configuration.
Glenn, do you need to have any specific kind of permissions to set these? Or is it possible to have a role defined exactly for this?
Yeah, it's That's a good question again, Mohit. In Purview, you have a lot of different type of roles. If you want to do RBAC on a very tight level, you can do something information protection administrator,
Mhm.
which makes you configure information protection labels. Yeah, or you're using compliance administrator. Global admin has also access to this one, and global admin has access to do RBAC within your. Um, Microsoft has decided to extend the support for because you have two types of publishing these labels. You have something called built-in labeling in 365, where you see the labels in Office or in Word and Outlook and PowerPoint and Excel. But you also have this Microsoft Purview Information Protection Client, which has been on a deprecated path for a while, but they seem to extend it, and they give a possibility to label data outside 365 apps, image files, different type of text files, and something. And there is also a support for disconnected computers as well. It's kind of a manual process where you need to export the label policy and import them into those computers, but it's possible. Um, yeah, and what I just highlighted that data boundary settings because it can be quite nice to know about because you can limit with this information protection client where they send the telemetry for this use of labels and so on. That can be limited to as I said to the EU data boundary. Quite useful to know. It probably has some specific scenarios. Someone has some questions. Someone has some experience with different type of label taxonomy that I suggested. But you, I see Andreas is typing here. You're on mute, Mohit.
I was just saying Andres is typing. Let's.
Ah, we are all force muted. That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah. But you could type your question if you want. I could unmute you.
Hello, Mick. Sorry,
Yeah.
Andreas.
I've had some nasty experience with online meetings, so I'm a little bit skeptic. You
Yeah.
should be able to talk now, Andreas.
I don't have any questions. I merely had an addition. They recently released a preview on the information protection client Glenn mentioned. I haven't had time to try it out properly yet, but from what I understand, it significantly extends what can be encrypted file-wise. And if you integrate it with the endpoint DLP, for the end user on a client that is managed and has endpoint DLP extended to the client, it'll actually automatically decrypt and encrypt the file as needed,
Oh,
adding to the functionality that Glenn talked about earlier. I haven't tried
yeah.
it yet, but if it works in practice, it is super nifty.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like Microsoft is like they are not because there's a couple like 3 or 4 years ago they tried to deprecate that Azure Information Protection Client. You remember?
Yeah.
But now they seem to go back on the into that Purview Unified client now. So they
It's
give a
renamed.
new function to it. Yeah, sorry.
Mm.
That was me interrupting you. Sorry.
Yeah,
I was just appreciating the irony that they renamed it again.
yeah. Andreas, since you raised your voice,
There.
what's your quick experience on naming of these labels? I
Uh,
try to give some few examples in here.
uh, I think, as you touched upon, one of the main issues here is that, if you'll pardon my French,
Yeah,
opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one.
yeah,
And we talk to different clients in public sector, in private sector, and so on, and none of them agree, not externally, not internally, what should labeling policies, what should labeling names be, and so on.
yeah,
And mostly they probably never will. But this creates a massive mess. And there's an old KXCD comic that says that we have 14 competing standards. We need one unified standard.
yeah.
Result, you now have 15 competing standards. So I think a lot of companies need to focus more on not needing to be unique in that categorization, because when people move between companies, labeling taxonomy will vary, and what meant one thing in a company you're coming from doesn't really mean the same thing in a company you're going to.
Yeah, agree.
So people need to try to standardize this in general to ease that part and reduce risk of misunderstandings. But it's also vital to have proper onboarding and proper training
Mm.
in proper classification. And it's incredibly important that labels uh, are understandable both in naming and the text explaining what they do. And you should really have information resources that are easy to look up. So nobody has a proper excuse. I mean,
Mm.
people will make mistakes. Most
Mm.
people aren't malicious in them. Of course, some are, but not all. So making it easy to use is vital to proper adoption and successful adoption. So in general, people will argue over it. And what we try to do is stay as close to the legal language as possible without adopting terms that have very strict definitions.
Yeah.
Pretty much when we try to standardize this package. But it is a massive discussion, and people need to be more pragmatic in general on this
Mm.
topic.
I
One
agree,
size does
agree.
not fit all, but one size gets far.
Yeah. It's nothing that's one size fits all. It's like,
Yeah,
as you said, not one size gets far. It's
yeah.
better than nothing.
And then we'll
Uh,
adapt the rest.
yeah, yeah. Because I see here in my examples here, I'll just be quick, short, and like this is from a different type of public sector in Norway. This is example from one of them. And this is from a total different part of public sector in Norway. You see, they have more or less the same structure, but they have different naming here. And this is because of legal issues.
Could you zoom in a little bit, Glenn?
Ah, okay. Yeah, probably a little bit small, this one. Because you
Yeah.
see here, it's like they have the same structure on the parent number of parent and sublabels, but they have different naming. Like here, you see sensitive, highly sensitive, and this is using confidential. This is highly confidential.
Glenn,
So
on the same thing, is it possible to configure these languages, these labels in like local languages? Because like Norwegian, Danish, and Finland, we have a lot of languages here. So is it possible to do this in local languages to have a better impact so that customers don't just choose the default every single time and can feel related?
yeah, yeah.
Actually,
I used it in this code here, where you can using where you sending advanced configuration to the labels, where you can have different type of description in different type of languages, and different type of also display name. But this
okay.
label is the same, and this one is connected to the settings on language of the operating system. So if you're a multi-language company, you can, and you don't have a policy that said that everything company policy is Spanish, French, English, or whatever it is. You can have adapted to the operating system language settings. Yeah.
And these data, because we're trying to do a geographical boundary, is it possible to make sure that the process that happens behind the scenes to make this possible also happens within the protective boundaries of that nation, or at least in EU?
Might be possible. I don't think so. This is more or less how you wanted to innovate. For example, if you want to have Indian language settings on your computer, that's the sites.
The language settings, from a legal perspective,
Yeah.
there are two issues here.
Yeah.
One, what language settings you use isn't really geographically sensitive information. So boundaries in that sense aren't really relevant. The other is that you need to consider many companies are multinational, but they have a working language. And what different terms mean can easily be different when translated.
Yeah.
So confidential. I mean, for example, what we in Norwegian we would call it fortrolig, is actually partially legally defined.
Yeah.
So you would need to be incredibly cautious when directly translating these terms. So it's important to involve the legal department or consult laws or legal whatever in the company you assist to determine what do you do. And many companies have an official language, and labeling will be in that language to avoid confusion, for example.
But
That's
as I mentioned earlier in the process of starting with label, this is what this oversight committee should decide. You see here, they're going through the relevant discipline, so they want to include departments like HR, legal, and security, and so on. So they like decide on this one before you start the configuration, and starting on deciding the label taxonomy itself. So that's why this one is very, very important. Critical factors for success, though. I think we are. Sorry, I just complete this one. I was getting a little bit too eager. Thank you for good contribution, Andreas and Mohit. I just enclose some URL for some from Microsoft. They did their best practices on this one with Secure by Default Foundation. Next session, probably in autumn, we will go more deeply into the encryption settings of the type of labels, where we're going to take a look at how you collaborate with the encryption, the information. And we're going to take a look at customer managed key, double key encryption, and so on, and talk about pros and cons. Yes?
Cool. Great session, Glenn. I put all those links in the chat already, and there's the link for our profiles if in case you want to connect. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Glenn. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.